I'm sitting next to Walker Wildmon, and we're in Tupelo, Mississippi. He is part of the storied Wildmon family, and the Wildmon family has been given a responsibility by God to steward a network of 180 radio stations and films and documentaries and books. And Walker, it's great to be sitting in I was going to say your studios. You don't view it that way. These are the donor studios, right?
That's right. We're a nonprofit, so we wouldn't be here without donors and supporters around the country. But yeah, this is the Lord's work. This is his ministry to steward. My grandfather started it, and I'm just glad to be a part of it.
I wanted to compliment you on your office being small. Your dad's office being small.
Yeah.
I've seen it on video. I've been in a lot of offices, media offices, New York Times, Associated Press, NPR multiple times, NBC, BlackRock. The lobby is gorgeous. It honors Jesus Christ. I love that. But I love the fact that things here are well done, beautifully done, but none of this is the fancy Herman Miller couches and all that. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We went through the building planning process when we built this Don Wildmon Center for Cultural Transformation, and the architects were kind of going through the formulas, and they were talking about, the executives, they usually get bigger offices, which makes sense.
Right.
But then we started looking at the square footage, and we were like, we only need like 150 square foot a person, even for executives. So we went with what's practical, and it works. It's a nice quality building, but yeah, to your point, it's not elaborate.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that as someone who works for you and then ultimately works for God through the donors. And you were the grandson of one of the original culture warriors before that was even a phrase. And I want to talk about what that was like to grow up that way. What's Grandpa's job? Grandpa's a culture warrior, and his name is Don Wildmon. He's gone home with the Lord, so we'll talk about that in a second. I do things here because I've got great partnerships with companies like Renew.Healthcare. And I never thought I'd be a guy that went to Mexico for healthcare because I thought I'd be going there and seeing like the bad Cuban healthcare with the light bulb hanging down and the stains on the floor. That's not the case. Renew is like a W hotel. It is in a resort setting, and it makes sense because what they do is so high touch. They use ethically gathered stem cells. These come from umbilical cords and placentas, never anything to do with abortion. God packed those stem cells with incredible powers. They build. So they were designed to build baby. They can build muscle tissue, tendon, cartilage. And I've seen people be wheeled in to Renew, being told your life is in a wheelchair, who walked out weeks later. They're so potent. If you're being told you need surgery or pills for the rest of your life, or you're just in constant pain, then stop. Go to Renew, RENUE.healthcare. And I pledged you, they'll tell you if they can help you. And if they cannot help you, they will tell you that as well. It's renew.healthcare. So you growing up, Grandpa's job is culture warrior. He's on TV. And do you remember the first thing in culture that he on which he sort of declared war in the name of God?
Well, it would have been network television. Back in the mid to late 70s, there weren't 100 channels, right? There were 5 or 6, 3 or 4, depending on which region of the country you lived in. So yeah, he went to war against network television, and there weren't a lot of options out there. So if there was sex, violence, and nudity on television, that was pretty much it. You were stuck with it. So network television was his first battle, and he got a lot of publicity. All the major newspapers covered it.
And how did they cover him?
It was very cynical and negative. Because he was this Mississippi Methodist preacher who had a little bit of a Mississippi slang to it, which we're still carrying strongly today with our Southern accent. But yeah, he was kind of the joke of the country. And these network television executives were on their high horse. They were thinking, we're bringing in millions of dollars through these advertisers and through these shows, and television is the new thing, right? Every family watches television in the evening at the time. And they thought to themselves, this Mississippi preacher is really going to bring us down. And he did. He did, many of them. And he figured out that the advertisers was where the vulnerability was. Mm-hmm. Because at the time in the late 70s, there was, of course, you had the sexual revolution, and things were trending in the wrong direction culturally to a degree, depending on what you were looking at specifically. But companies still actually had some sort of attention to decency, right? They cared what the consumer thought, and they didn't want to be viewed as being vulgar or explicit or pornographic with some of their stuff and what they're sponsoring. So companies responded to 100, 200 letters from customers that were upset about their advertising dollars. So he figured out that if you target advertisers, you can make a huge impact on the types of shows that are being sponsored.
And as the grandson, I mean, you grew up in Mississippi, and it's different here than I grew up on the West Coast. And I grew up in a conservative portion of the West Coast. Spokane is different than Seattle. I remember people who did later picked up on what your grandpa did, being jokes and they're these Southern rednecks. Forgive the phrase. I'm 79.7% redneck myself, so I get to say it. How did it feel as a young man that the network TV bosses and newspapers were trying to make Grandpa a joke?
Yeah, well, I didn't. For whatever reason, for better or worse, I was kind of insulated to the whole culture war concept until I got into my teen and high school years. Yeah. Because it was just Don Wildmon was my grandfather, and it was just normal, right, for him to be engaged in the culture war, running the ministry on the front page news. That was kind of normal. But as I grew up, I began to really grasp what was going on in our country and how my grandfather was really being targeted for his approach to the issues of our day. And I'll tell you what, you can't operate around here, and you can't really operate in this cultural environment that we're in America without a bit of a thick skin. And I learned quickly not to really care what other people think about you unless it's your loved ones, your family, and your friends that are using things through a biblical lens, that are analyzing things through a biblical lens. Because what the pagans think about us really shouldn't bother us, right? A lot of Christians are too concerned about what the world thinks, and they want to be perceived well in the world. That's really a backwards way of looking at it. I want to know, what does God's word say about how I'm living and how I'm conducting myself? And that's really all that matters. And so that's really a challenge for people who think conservatively and think biblically. We shouldn't care what the enemies of God think about us.
And I love that you say pagans, and I know that you're not saying that lightly. There are pagan lands.
Yeah.
And if you've not been to a pagan land, I'll give you an example. That there is where I live across the border in Spokane, which is largely conservative, there's a bar downtown, and the bar is hell. I mean, it's not kind of hell. It says out front, "Welcome to hell."
Yeah.
And the drinks in there are named after demons. It says up front, to blank with your liver.
Yeah.
And it is a place where they encourage excess, where the more perversity you show going in, the further up in line you get to enter. So that's paganism on display. And I talk to young people and say, "Oh, it's joking." No, they're just being ironic. It's just a fun place to go. And I go, no. Do you think the devil cares that you think it's a joke, right? What he cares about is you're celebrating this stuff. From your position in Tupelo, Mississippi, and obviously you're aware of the culture given what you do. What does that sound like to you in terms of kids driving by and seeing that? Does that just sound bizarre to you?
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate that that's even acceptable, right?
Right.
That there's not a large outcry that type of darkness is being promoted and really mocked. And yeah, I use the word pagan. I actually use it on my daily show pretty often. And some people may think I'm using it as a kind of an inflammatory term. But when you look throughout human history, every human culture is going to worship something, right? There's no, this whole talk about neutrality, and we could get into neutrality and how companies could remain neutral and focus on their primary business purposes, which is what my grandfather talked about. But when it comes to our affections, there is no neutrality. We are going to draw ourselves to something, someone. And so when cultures abandon the God of the Bible and the Creator, they end up worshiping something else. And that's how you get pagan cultures, whether it's alcohol, pornography, sex, abortion. Every culture that really displaces God ends up worshiping something else. So that term pagan is actually very accurate throughout human history of cultures that abandon God.
And, Satan is an expert at casting himself as a creature of light, right? And he pretends to be this light-filled being. People end up worshiping their kids. Now, this sounds really strange, but you think about, Child Sports Society. Well, yeah, we'd like to go to church, but man, our kids, they're on a traveling team now.
Yeah.
And anything that is removing you from God or separating you from God, you're spending more time in that can become worship. People worry about this with CrossFit. Like, you spend so much time on fitness. Are you sure that's not separating you from God? Hey, there's a lot of things that might separate me from God. It wouldn't be that.
Yeah.
For me, it'd be politics. It'd be concern about the world. What do you do personally to make sure that your work, you're in a ministry,
Yeah.
but how do you make sure that work doesn't become work, a thing you worship, versus ministry for God? Because I hear a lot of pastors say that's the difficult thing, is all of a sudden you don't even enjoy praying anymore because it's, oh my gosh, it's just another prayer.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to ask ourselves two things. Why do we do what we do, and where do we get our satisfaction from? Those are the two primary questions that we have to ask ourselves. And whether it's running a ministry, running a business, or even shepherding your home, why do we do what we do, and what is our motivation? And if it's anything outside of being a good steward for God's kingdom purposes, then you often lose track, right? So, and we have to find peace when we're not in our element, so to speak, right? So when we're not in what we love to do, what we have passion for, whether it's business, nonprofit, parenting, etc., we have to be able to have peace outside of our quote unquote comfort zone. And so that's what I tend to stay focused on, is doing everything that I'm doing to be a good steward. And whether it's CrossFit, look, there's a lot of things that we can do with enjoyment that God gifted us with, and it can all be centered towards Him and His purposes without us losing focus on the big picture. But you do have to be very careful, because every culture can tend to idolize something, and idolizing children is a thing. And God, here's the thing, and it's true with every culture: good things can turn to bad things, right? Without the proper perspective. Yeah. So children are a blessing from the Lord. Genesis says, be fruitful and multiply. But if you're not careful and you don't keep Christ first in a biblical worldview, and your role as a parent and a disciple and a raiser of children in focus, then before you know it, you're just doing everything you can to make your kids happy. So the question is, why do we do what we do? And what gives us fulfillment and purpose? And we just have to keep the main thing the main thing.
I love it. And there's a movie coming out, Culture Warrior, about your grandpa, and that's going to be seen around the country. And you can go to, is it Culture Warrior movie? Yeah, culturewarrior.movie. Get tickets for that. And I would just say this, as a guy who fell victim to idolizing my little girl's athletic promise, that was Satan hiding as an angel of light. And I would just offer you guys this thought as well. If you find yourself hiding portions of the Bible from your kids, this is a big one. Let's not talk about the messy social issues. Let's make sure that our kids, they like God. Let's make God hip. Maybe you're worshiping the world.